here we can see some very strict definitions of fungi by what they are. And these definitions are important to you, so I would like you to spend a little bit of time and pay attention to these definitions. First and foremost are the mold fungi. Mold fungi, by definition, are surface-growing organisms that cause a discoloration of the material that they're growing on, normally by the production of coloured mycelium or coloured spores, and they don't physically destroy the structural integrity of the material that they're growing on. The next group of organisms is the stain fungi. And these organisms we do find in homes, but they're not really growing in homes and they're not causing damage in homes. What happens is when we fell a tree out in the forest, these organisms grow very rapidly in the tree, and we can see the discoloration in the wood as a result of that growth, even after the tree has been processed into lumber and used in the building. But those organisms are not harmful in any way, and so we just need to know what they are in case we see them in a home. And then finally, the group of organisms which are really of most relevance and most interest to us are the decay fungi. Now, these are organisms that grow in materials, and they use the structural cellulose of wood as their food source. So they literally do destroy the structural integrity of a piece of wood when they use the wood as a food source. And here we can see those three different types of fungi now, with pictures of them so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. In the top picture there, you can see that the wood there has actually lost some of its structural integrity. The wood itself has been eaten by a fungus, so by definition we can see that that is a decay fungi. The decay fungi happen to be basidiomycetes, if you remember the slide I showed you 2 slides ago. The bottom left picture there that you can see, we can see that we've got coloured mycelium growing within the piece of wood. There's not really a surface growth, it's more of a discoloration within the piece of wood, and we can see that where the wood has been cut through. So by definition there we have stain fungi, and that probably occurred in the forest when that tree was first felled. And then the last picture you can see there on the bottom right, we can see a surface discoloration where you can actually see a kind of dusty residue of discoloration on the surface of that piece of wood, and that by definition is a mold fungus that we can see growing there. Okay, let's have a look now at the specific requirements of fungal growth. I've put the list up for you here so you can look at. Essentially though, if we avoid number 7 at the end, all of those things are basically the same as human requirements. So, you know, humans have to be present in order to produce more humans, and that's true with fungi as well. We have to have a water source, we have to have a food source, we have to have a certain comfortable temperature range in order to survive. And you can see that all of these things on the list here are very, very similar to human requirements. So it should really be of no surprise to us that humans build our houses with certain requirements that we need and like to feel comfortable. So fungi can share those exact same requirements and live in our homes the same as we can. There's really only one thing on that list, those items 1 to 6 there, that we've got any control on whatsoever, and that happens to be the moisture or the water. So if we look more specifically at that, we can see that I said that you need a wood moisture content of more than 20% or a continuous relative humidity of more than 80% in order to have a problem with fungal growth. And that's not normal for us to have those types of that situation inside homes. Wood is normally drier than a wood moisture content of 20%. And the relative humidity in a home is normally lower than 80% relative humidity. The final item I've got on my list there is whether there are any preservatives, fungicide or inhibitors present, and I'll touch on that at the end of this presentation today. So the important thing from this list then, really, everything pales into insignificance apart from moisture, because moisture is the only thing that we have any control over, so it becomes the most important factor. So here we can see that if wood is wet enough, that's a wood moisture content of more than 20%, then we will have a fungal problem. And if the air is wet enough, i.e. we've got a relative humidity of more than 80%, we know that we will have a problem, and everything else kind of pales into insignificance. Just for a little bit of background information, the Indoor Air Quality Association recommends that the normal and healthy range for relative humidity in a home should be between 40 and 60% relative humidity. And the wood moisture content typically in a home ranges from about 12 to 18% moisture content, depending on location in the country and the ambient weather conditions. And when we buy kiln-dried lumber to build new homes, by definition, that has to be kiln-dried down to 19% moisture content or lower. So we know it's completely safe from fungal infestation at the time of purchase when it's kiln-dried to 19% moisture content. Let's have a look at some different construction materials then and their susceptibility to mold growth here under ideal conditions. Ideal conditions being described as a continuous relative humidity above 80% or a wood moisture content above 20%. Here you can see we've got a number of different materials here. The SYP stands for Southern Yellow Pine. We've got plasterboard or sheetrock, aspen oriented strand board, Southern Yellow Pine oriented strand board, and Douglas fir, all on the right hand side there. And on the left hand side we can see we've got a mold rating, a mold coverage rating, and this is just whether the product has no mold growing on it or is completely covered with mold, basically. And then along the bottom there you can see that we have a time scale which increases from 0 up to about 8 weeks. What's important from this though is, first of all, you can see that the Southern Yellow Pine structural lumber and the sheetrock or plasterboard material in this test are almost completely covered with mold after 1 week of incubation under the ideal conditions. So two of the most abundant construction materials we use today are completely mouldy within about 1 week. All of the other materials are also susceptible to mould and will eventually go mouldy, but for example Douglas fir just takes a little bit longer. So typically we see that Douglas fir, for example, can take 4 or even 5 weeks before it goes completely mouldy. If we have a look and see what those actual samples look like, gives us a slightly better picture. We can see that all of those materials go very, very mouldy in a very short period of time. And you can see here on the wood materials we've got a lot of aspergillus type mould growth. That's the kind of black, grainy mould growth we can see there. And on the sheetrock there we've got a slimy looking black mould. And when we find black slimy mould on processed cellulose products like sheetrock, that's actually a good indication that it's probably Stachybotrys, or the so-called toxic black mold that a lot of people get very concerned about. However, all mold and all fungi is potentially harmful, so I don't want you to be scared by any particular single type of fungi. I just want you to be generally concerned by all fungi, because none of them belong in our homes and they all cause different types of problems. That takes us on nicely to the potential health effects associated with fungi. So we've got the health effects of fungal growth, and I've listed a number of things there. The most important one that we shouldn't forget is actually structural failure. When a home collapses and falls on our heads, or if you fall through a floor in a home, or if the deck on the 3rd story on the back of an apartment building collapses with 20 people on it that are having a party, there's obviously a potential health effect associated with that. So fungal decay, or the Basidiomycete decay fungi, are by far and away the greatest potential health threat to homeowners, in my opinion. But